Oh my gosh, I can't believe I promised this for years and never got it out.
And no, I am not going to bring up how it plays out in the sequel. That's for a later countdown. I want to get this rule across. No water levels. There are a lot of terrible water levels that I'm saving for another list.
Well, here I am years later and I still haven't made that countdown. Well, now it's time for me to keep my promise. Water levels are arguably the most hated types of levels in gaming because most of the time, the physics are altered drastically in a way that is usually not good at all. Whether it be because of drowning, slower movement, or anything that can make a bad water level. I don't have any rules for the list aside from ones that always appear on these countdowns. With that out of the way, time to begin. As awesome as Donkey Kong 64 is, it's so easy to get lost because the levels are about the size of New York City that actually feels like parts of the levels are actually shuffling. Sometimes I feel like I go in one direction only to end up in a completely different place than I was the last time I went there. Case in point, Gloomy Galleon. Now, instead of getting lost on the ground, with how much water space there is, it's even easier to get lost because you might not know how high or low you should be. And I'm not exaggerating when I say fully completing this level can take over 2 hours. Trust me, when I was getting footage for this, the total was almost that long, and I skipped over the minigames and revisited some of the footage. And as you'd expect from the name of the level, the atmosphere is just downright gloomy, if not somewhat cool, but it still puts me in a bit of a bad mood. And like most water levels, you move so slow, which is not as fun as witnessing this vomit-inducing camera style on the ship part. And the boss of this level, Puff Toss, well, I can't really remember if I like it or hate it. It's also a waste of a Lanky Kong exclusive boss, because instead of actually testing his abilities like the Baboon Balloon or the Erang Sprint, it puts him in a boat, which isn't bad, but again, doesn't let his moves shine in this fight. Though I do have a confession to make. This was kind of a filler entry for the list, because I couldn't come up with 10 bad enough entries, but it's still not one of the better levels in the game. Star Fox 64 is definitely a classic game, no doubt about it. As a part of some people's childhoods, there's a lot to love about it, and some things to not love about it, such as the Aquas level. It's already pretty difficult getting here, requiring you to let next to none of the enemies in the Sector Y level go through, but coming here feels like it doesn't pay off enough unless you somehow manage to stay on the correct path for Venom for long enough, which I still have yet to do. This level is a submarine level, which sounds like a cool idea on paper, seeing the Great Fox put its docking bay in the water and deploying submarines to travel under the water. The problem? It suffers from classic water level syndrome, with the controls being way too slippery, and the fact that they lag. Great idea, right? Oh, and guess what they decided to throw in? Darkness! Because that never harms a player. True, you can fire torpedoes to light up the area for like a split second, but you have to wait for them to cool down. If that wasn't already painful, the boss of the level, Baekun, how are we supposed to take him seriously with a name like that? Has attacks that hit like a truck, and we're fighting him in the dark. Even after you beat this level, if you're playing the N64 version, don't think you're rid of it for good because next you're on to Zonas, and the only way to get to Sector Z is to shoot all the headlights before it's too late, and if you miss just one enough times to get game over, then because the N64 version doesn't have a level select screen, you have to go back to Corneria, save Falco at the point where you need to, go through every single arch to unlock the alternate path, go back to Sector Y and stop enough enemies from getting through, and then come back to this level and beat it yet again. Atlantica just had to be on here. Atlantica was pretty okay in the first Kingdom Hearts, no thanks to the aimless wandering at times, so I was interested to see what the sequel had in store for us. But my smile faded once I found out the main mechanic of it. Instead of having a water level with fine controls, we got singing and dancing. Because nothing says hack and slash RPG like that. This is a rhythm game world, but it sounds somewhat awkward.
I got gadgets and gizmos aplenty.
Doesn't the timing of that command sound weird to you? What's worse is that the songs are lacking. Only 2 songs that are actually from the movie, while the others aren't as good as they could be. While I don't hate the song A New Day is Dawning that much, Ursula's Revenge, while it sounds somewhat decent, it has some dumb lyrics at times. And you beat Ursula, an all-powerful evil witch, by singing and dancing. Wow. Also, why call it a fight if you only hit her once throughout the entire song? Then of course, the most infamous of them all, Swim This Way. When the lyrics don't sound like they were written by 3rd graders, they sound like something you'd hear in a tutorial. Well, at least the song's entertaining, for all the wrong reasons. And at least it's better than the songs from Little Mermaid 2 Return to the Sea, I'll give it that. Oh yeah, there's one last song played in only in a cutscene, which is bar none the worst of them all. I wouldn't show you how bad it is, but I'll just spare you guys the earring. The story's decent, but it has a lot of questionable choices. King Triton has to learn the same moral he learned in the first movie, and Ursula and her minions were brought back by the powers of darkness. I don't get it. No wonder the Heartless didn't come to this world. And unlike the rest of the screen transitions in the Disney worlds, which actually had important things from their respective movies, this world's screen transition is just a generic music note. The Little Mermaid may not have been one of my all-time favorite Disney movies. Heck, it's not even my top 25 due to the amount of competition it has, but it was still a good movie, and seeing it be used on this is just disgraceful. Thank goodness the rumors of Arendelle being a music-based world were false, and even when we did hear songs, it didn't tie into the gameplay. Otherwise, my favorite movie would be this bad level all over again. Yippee! My most hated water level in the Mario series. Level 7-4 of Super Mario Bros. 3 gets extremely infuriating at times, especially in the Game Boy Advance port with the screen limitations. Because there's not much room to move around, there's not much room to avoid the enemies. Underwater and auto-scrolling combined with low screen limitations will very likely lead to your doom because of how the screen is crowded in the first underwater stretch. But wait, it gets worse. Eventually the level will scroll up into a field of Gelectros. With so many of them on the screen, you're going to have to squeeze your way through. Unless you somehow manage to save a frog suit, float too high and you die, float too low and you die. There may not be many kinds of Marios outside of Mario Maker, but this is probably the closest we had to one in an older Mario game. And this is a kid's game. When I was younger, I used to call this level the Killer Sea. And even though it isn't a very creative name, since, you know, I was a kid back then, it doesn't deserve a good name. Pac-Man World 2 has some interesting water levels. They may not have the best controls, but at least they look nice. And as long as we're not going into Yellow Pac Marine, I don't feel like throwing my controller across the room. It takes way too long to get to the other side of the screen because the controls are so slippery. To be fair, that was also a problem in the other water levels, but instead of the nice looking scenery in those ones, you get dark, murky, and lame visuals. The perspective also makes it hard to tell where to swim to avoid the mines and pipes. It doesn't seem so bad at first, but it becomes a big problem later on in the level. And sometimes enemies just show up, not giving you enough time to react until they hit you. And once you get hit, you lose control of yourself for a bit of time. You do have the ability to defend yourself, but with torpedoes, which travel really, really slowly, and can't even fire rapidly without running out of ammo for a few seconds. And even though it looks like you're locking onto the enemies, it doesn't work as much as you'd think. You also get smart bombs, but while trying to save them for a special occasion, one hit and you lose the bomb. Oh, and it's an auto-scroller, so it's possible to miss collectibles. This level is a complete mess, and it can be sent to Davy Jones' locker for all I care. Now, I know I put this level on the original version of my hated levels list, where I said this qualifies as a non-water level, but like I said earlier, I couldn't find 10 bad enough water levels, so I just decided to count this in both countdowns. Besides, that list was made 4 years ago, so you can't really blame me for changing my mind. The Kelp Forest is the worst level in Battle for Bikini Bottom because of one massive reason: the darkness. It's nearly impossible to see in here unless you have a super expensive HD TV. When combined with the dreary visuals, it makes Gloomy Galleon look like Disney World. The level starts out as literally straightforward for the most part, until you get to the Kelp Swamp. Now it turns into a series of twists and turns, including having to bounce on leaves that practically blend in with the water. Dark green and dark blue should never go together when you're in a platforming segment in the dark. In order to proceed to the Kelp Caves, you need to bring back 3 stone tikis in order to hold down these switches. Bringing them back will give you a headache, because they explode if you make a wrong move, and your movement is hindered when carrying them. Next up, we have the Kelp Caves, which I don't remember seeing anywhere in the episode, and in addition to the advanced darkness, now we have cliffs. You won't be able to see where you're going, and sometimes you might accidentally walk off the edge, forcing you to do even more aimless wandering when trying to get back up. And lastly, we have the Kelp Vines. Sliding segments in this game have proven to be enjoyable before and after this one, but now you're sliding on very skinny vines in the dark. And best of all, you're on a time limit. Now I know how Squidward felt in the episode this forest originated from. I really hope the remake fixes the lack of clear vision in this stupid level. I haven't played many licensed space games, but from the ones I've played, they're relatively decent, at least from what I can remember, with the exception of a few. With the worst one being the Game Boy Advance port of Finding Nemo. The graphics look blurry, the gameplay gets really repetitive, the music is stupid, forgettable, or both, and the final level should have never seen the light of day. The majority of the level is just navigating your way through a huge maze of sewer pipes and these annoying crabs that keep jumping quickly to attack you. Despite that, however, the level isn't even that challenging overall, since the level feels like it just keeps repeating the same section over and over again. So eventually, you find Dory and you have to make it through a straight path, past some obstacles such as big fish, but there's so much room to swim around them unless you just want to charge through it and get it over with. So eventually, Nemo and Marlin finally get reunited, but there's something missing. What about the final conflict? The one where Nemo had to free Dory from the giant fishing net? That conflict did kind of come out of nowhere, but at least it was still a climax, and it was there to put Marlin's faith in his son to the test. Well, I guess we do get this heartwarming dialogue exchange, but even then, you could just witness it in the movie. If you can make an ending better, sometimes it probably shouldn't be remade. I know this game was made to entertain children who want to feel like they're in the movie, but there's a very well-known quote from Walt Disney, who once said that you're dead if you only appeal to kids. While I'll admit he did take that too far sometimes, I'd prefer that over this game which barely even attempts to entertain adults. Overall, this is a poor ending to a poor game. Guess it only makes sense that a poor game would end on a poor final level. Whalebane from Rayman Revolution is the epitome of stressful water levels. Not only are the swimming controls a real headache to get used to, but the level itself tends to be pretty annoying at multiple points. In this segment, you'll end up aimlessly wandering, not knowing where to go. It'll take even longer to find your destination because of the air meter. Sometimes I worry that I won't make it to the surface fast enough. We also have a shipwreck part, where you have to hit a switch, but it's pretty easy to gloss right past it. There's also a segment where you have to follow a whale and grab its air bubbles to prevent you from drowning. It's not so bad at first, but eventually the whale starts zigzagging all over the place, making him hard to keep up with, and the piranhas will keep stealing your air bubbles, forcing you to mash both buttons at the same time to repel them and swim. Why do piranhas even want air bubbles anyway? Don't fish breathe water? But the worst part is the atmosphere of the level. Remember when I complained about gloomy Galleon on Kelp for its atmosphere? Well, this level's atmosphere, combined with the completely stressful music, just makes me completely depressed. This isn't what I bought a cartoony game to do. I bought this game to have fun. I didn't buy a game to feel like an emotionless wreck. Now I'm probably putting this level higher than I should, because I couldn't find that many gameplay problems, but the horrible atmosphere is what sticks with me more than the gameplay in this particular entry. Don't worry, I have much more justifiable reasons for the placements of the top two than I have for this one. Alright, now we're getting into the water temple. I'm pretty sure most of you saw this coming. Well, either this or the Great Bay Temple. But even though I personally think Ocarina is the better game, I love the Great Bay Temple and hated the Water Temple. I'm sure everything's already been said about this dungeon, but I'm going to explain it anyways. Ocarina's water mechanics are some of the worst in any video game anywhere. Walking on the seafloor isn't that bad, but you spend most of your time having to align yourself. You know how that works? You scroll to the equipment screen, switch on the iron boots so you can float down, and then when you go too low, you have to go back to the menu again and take off your iron boots in order to float back up. As if having to keep backtracking to play Zelda's Lullaby to adjust the water level wasn't repetitive enough. Well then again, what do I expect from the dungeon that this brat is the sage of? When I first played this game, I was actually worried that I would never be able to beat it. Even the boss fight is terrible. He's just a giant water tentacle, and he has the ability to grab you for way too long, forcing you to do absolutely nothing for 10 seconds, as he takes away so much of your health. We have a level so atrocious that even the creator of the game himself feels guilty for making. That is a terrible sign. Overall, the only fun part of this level, other than the music, is the river segment, which is an awesome part. But what keeps this level from being number one is that the 3DS remake of this game fixed the main problem of the dungeon by making the iron boots as easy to switch on as just pressing a button. Number one, on the other hand, of course, what other choice could I have put as number one on my list, other than the underwater heck hole known as the Labyrinth Zone? I know that I topped my list with a predictable entry, but I couldn't find any water levels that are worse than this. Sonic water levels are considered to be some of the most frustrating levels in gaming history, This is easily the most infamous of them all. Having a hedgehog who can't swim maybe isn't such a good idea if you're going to make the water physics so terrible. You know about all that high-speed action in the Sonic series? Yeah, this level has almost none of that. Sonic moves too slow under the water, from his walking speed to his jumping. How about we add in a breath meter where Sonic drowns if he's in water for too long without getting enough air bubbles. As a result, you'll likely not be able to surface before you drown. This is especially bad in the boss fight, where you have to chase after Robotnik while climbing a flooding shaft with no air bubbles, and spikes everywhere that'll slow you down on top of hindering your progress. Want to know why this is worse than the Water Temple? Because like I said, the Water Temple was fixed in the 3DS version, while the game's remake actually made the Labyrinth Zone worse. Terrible sound effects, especially the bubble sound effects that make me want to cry out for mercy, music that makes my ears bleed, and some of the worst collision detection ever. And the worst part is that you are much slower in this port, as if you weren't slow enough underwater. And since this terrible remake was actually the first Sonic game I played, that makes this even more insulting, and even more deserving of what I think is the worst water level ever. I'm Meta527 II, and if you want to see a Sonic game handle water levels right, go check out Aquarium Park.